The Grandview Country Club's ballroom had never looked more spectacular. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the polished marble floors, while white roses and golden ribbons decorated every table. 200 of the city's most prominent families had gathered to celebrate Harold and Patricia Bennett's 30th wedding anniversary, the social event of the season. "Don't embarrass us here, Sophia." My mother's whispered words cut through the elegant atmosphere as she adjusted her pearl necklace for the third time. She looked resplendent in her navy blue Chanel gown, every inch the successful attorney's wife she'd worked 30 years to become. "This is the most important night of our lives," she continued, her voice barely audible above the string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. "Everyone who matters in this city is here. The mayor, the Chamber of Commerce president, half the city council. We cannot afford any of your eccentricities." I smoothed down my simple black cocktail dress, the same one I'd worn to 3 other family events this year. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned that expensive clothes drew the wrong kind of attention from people who made assumptions about success based on price tags. "I understand, Mom," I replied quietly, watching my younger brother Michael work the room in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. At 28 he was already making partner at Dad's law firm, following the approved family path toward respectability and social status. Dad appeared at Mom's elbow, resplendent in his custom-made dinner jacket. Harold Bennett, senior partner at Bennett & Associates, the man who'd built his legal practice into one of the region's most respected firms over 3 decades of careful relationship building and strategic networking. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of barely contained disappointment. "I see you decided to come after all. It's your anniversary, Dad." "Of course I came." "Well, just try to blend in tonight, all right? Don't mention your little art projects or whatever it is you do in that warehouse. If anyone asks, tell them you're in commercial real estate development. That sounds respectable." I nodded and smiled, the same smile I'd perfected over years of family gatherings where my actual career was treated like an embarrassing family secret. Around us, the cream of the city's society mingled and networked, their conversations a carefully orchestrated symphony of business deals, political connections and social climbing. The country club had been Dad's obsession for 15 years. Membership here meant you'd truly arrived in the city's elite circles. The initiation fee alone was $250,000, with annual dues of $50,000, prices that kept out anyone who wasn't serious about maintaining their social status. "There's Senator Williams," Mom whispered excitedly, nodding toward a distinguished man in his 60s. "Harold, we should go say hello. This could be perfect timing for that judicial appointment discussion." As my parents glided away to pursue their political networking, I found myself alone at our family's assigned table. Table 1, naturally, positioned perfectly for maximum visibility and social impact. The place cards were written in elegant calligraphy. Mr. and Mrs. Harold Bennett, Michael Bennett, and simply Sophia. No title, no professional designation, just my name floating in the social void of family disappointment. I picked up my champagne flute and took a small sip of what was probably a $300 bottle of Dom Perignon. The country club never cut corners when it came to impressing its members and their guests. Quite a turnout tonight. I turned to see Thomas Morrison, the club manager, approaching our table. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and the kind of understated elegance that came from 30 years of managing the affairs of very wealthy people. "It's beautiful, Mr. Morrison. Mom and Dad must be thrilled." He smiled warmly. "Your parents have been wonderful members for so many years. Though I have to say, Miss Bennett, it's quite an honor to have you here tonight." I raised an eyebrow. "An honor?" "Oh yes," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "When I received the call from your assistant about the special arrangements for tonight, I was absolutely delighted. It's not every day we get to host an event for someone of your prominence in the business community." My assistant. Special arrangements. I felt my stomach drop slightly as I realized what was happening. "Mr. Morrison," I said carefully, "what exactly did my assistant tell you?" "About the acquisition, of course. Meridian Holdings' purchase of the Grandview Country Club. The paperwork was finalized this afternoon, wasn't it? Your assistant called to confirm the ownership transition would be seamless during tonight's celebration." The champagne flute felt suddenly heavy in my hand. Around us, the anniversary party continued in blissful ignorance. Guests laughing, the string quartet playing, my parents holding court near the senator's table. Of course, I said quietly. Seamless transition. Brilliant strategy really, Morrison continued enthusiastically. Acquiring the club just before your parents' anniversary celebration. They must be so proud. Though I suppose they already know about your real estate empire, don't they? Before I could answer, Dad's voice boomed across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention please. The room gradually quieted as 200 of the city's most prominent citizens turned toward the main stage where Dad stood with a microphone, Mom beaming beside him in her designer gown. Patricia and I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 30 wonderful years of marriage, Dad began, his courtroom voice carrying easily across the ballroom. This club has been like a second home to us, a place where we've built lifelong friendships and shared countless memories. Scattered applause rippled through the crowd. I noticed several city council members nodding approvingly, probably already thinking about which political favors they might discuss over brandy later. As many of you know, Dad continued, success in life isn't just about personal achievement. It's about family, community, and building something meaningful for the next generation. His eyes found mine across the ballroom and I could see the unspoken message in his expression. This is what success looks like, Sophia. This is what you should be aspiring to. Speaking of the next generation, Dad said with practiced charm, I'd like to acknowledge our son Michael, who's carrying on the family legal tradition with such distinction, and our daughter Sophia, who is, well, she's still finding her path. Polite laughter scattered through the crowd. A few people at nearby tables glanced in my direction with expressions that ranged from curiosity to pity. The senator's wife actually patted her husband's arm and whispered something that made him shake his head sympathetically. Morrison, who had been standing quietly beside our table during Dad's speech, suddenly looked confused. Still finding her path? He murmured. But surely he knows about. That's when Dad spotted Morrison near our table and decided to do what successful attorneys do best. Work the room. Thomas. Dad called out jovially, stepping down from the stage. Come here, my friend. I want you to meet some of our distinguished guests. Morrison straightened his tie and walked toward Dad with a slightly puzzled expression. The crowd pressed closer, curious about this interaction between their host and the club's respected manager. Thomas Morrison has been managing this club for 15 years now? Dad announced to the gathered crowd. He's turned this place into the crown jewel of the city's social scene. Actually, sir, Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet ballroom, I need to speak with you about that. There's been a significant change in the club's ownership structure. Dad's smile faltered slightly. Change? What kind of change? Morrison glanced around at the 200 faces watching this exchange with growing interest. Perhaps we should discuss this privately? Nonsense, Dad said, his attorney instincts kicking in. We're all friends here. What's this about, Thomas? Morrison cleared his throat nervously. Well, sir, as of this afternoon, the Grandview Country Club has been acquired by Meridian Holdings. The sale was finalized at 3:47 p.m. today. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people pulled out their phones, probably Googling Meridian Holdings to see what they could find. Acquired. Mom stepped forward, her social smile still perfectly in place but her voice carrying a slight edge. By whom? Morrison looked directly at me, then back at my parents with obvious confusion. By your daughter, sir. Miss Sophia Bennett is the principal owner of Meridian Holdings. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice melting in people's drinks. Dad's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Mom's glass followed a second later, Dom Perignon and crystal spreading across the ballroom floor in a glittering mess. I'm sorry, Dad said slowly, could you repeat that? Miss Bennett owns the country club now, Morrison said, speaking louder for the benefit of the 200 people hanging on every word. Meridian Holdings purchased the facility for $47 million this afternoon. It was quite competitive. We had 3 other offers, but Miss Bennett's was significantly higher and came with better terms for the staff. Michael appeared at Dad's side, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. Sophia owns the country club? I stood up slowly, feeling 200 pairs of eyes following my every movement. The simple black dress that had seemed so modest earlier now felt like armor as I walked across the ballroom floor toward my family. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. Meridian Holdings owns the country club. It's just one property in our portfolio. Your portfolio? Mom whispered. I pulled out my phone and opened my real estate management app, the same app one checked every morning to review overnight reports from our properties across 12 states. We own 43 commercial properties including 6 hotels, 12 office buildings, 8 retail centers, and now 17 private clubs. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. But you said you were in commercial real estate development, Dad said weakly. I am in commercial real estate development, I replied. I just didn't mention that I own most of the commercial real estate in this part of the state. Senator Williams stepped forward from the crowd, his political instincts clearly intrigued by this unexpected development. Miss Bennett, I had no idea we had such a significant business owner in our community. How large is your operation? Meridian Holdings manages approximately $2.3 billion in property assets, I said matter-of-factly. We employ about 800 people directly and support roughly 3,000 jobs indirectly through our various properties and developments. The murmur that ran through the crowd was like electricity. I could practically see people recalculating their entire understanding of the Bennett family hierarchy. 2.3 billion? Michael repeated, his voice cracking slightly on the word billion. That's the conservative valuation, I explained. The Seattle expansion we're planning should add another $600 million by next year. Morrison was beaming now, clearly delighted by this turn of events. Miss Bennett has been incredibly generous with our staff, by the way. She's implementing a profit-sharing program and providing full healthcare coverage for all employees. Mayor Davidson pushed through the crowd, his political radar fully activated. Miss Bennett, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Mayor Davidson and I have to say this is quite impressive. Have you considered any public-private partnership opportunities with the city? Before I could answer, my phone rang with the distinctive tone I'd assigned to my chief financial officer. I glanced at the screen. Robert Chinfifo. Excuse me, I said to the crowd. I need to take this. It's about the Portland acquisition. I answered the phone without putting it on speaker this time. I'd learned that lesson from too many dramatic family moments. Hello, Robert. Sophia, great news. The Portland deal just closed. $340 million for the entire waterfront development project. We officially own the largest mixed-use development on the West Coast now. I couldn't help but smile. Excellent. Any complications? None. The city council was thrilled to have a developer with our track record taking over. They're especially excited about our affordable housing commitment. Perfect. I'll review the integration plans tomorrow. Actually, there's one more thing. That interview request from Forbes about being the youngest woman to own over $2 billion in real estate assets? They want to schedule it for next week. I glanced around at 200 faces staring at me with expressions ranging from awe to complete bewilderment. Let me call you back about that, Robert. I'm at a family event. Of course. Congratulations again on the Portland deal. This puts us ahead of schedule for the $5 billion portfolio target. I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my purse. The ballroom remained absolutely silent. $5 billion? Dad asked faintly. That's our 3-year growth target, I explained. We're currently ahead of schedule. Mom had gone completely pale. Sophia, I don't understand. If you own all this, why do you live in that little apartment? Why do you drive that old Honda? Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see if you'd love me and respect me when you thought I was just someone who was still finding her path, I said gently. I wanted to know if your pride in me was conditional on my net worth. The truth hung in the ballroom air like incense from a cathedral. For years, you've introduced me as the daughter who hasn't figured things out yet. You've apologized for my lifestyle, dismissed my work, and treated my career choices like they were temporary phases I'd eventually outgrow. I looked around at the crowd of the city's most prominent citizens, all hanging on every word of this very public family drama. But I have figured things out. I just did it quietly without fanfare while you were looking for the kind of success that comes with expensive clothes and social recognition. Morrison stepped forward with a gentle cough. Miss Bennett, if I may, would you like to address your guests about the club's future? Many of them seem quite curious about your plans. I looked at him, then at my parents, then at the 200 faces watching this unfold like a live soap opera. Actually, yes, I said, walking toward the small stage where Dad had been speaking earlier. If I could have everyone's attention? The crowd pressed closer, phones appearing as people prepared to capture whatever was about to happen. First, I want to assure all club members that nothing will change in terms of your membership experience. If anything, we're planning significant improvements to the facilities over the next year. Relieved murmurs rippled through the crowd. These were people who valued stability and exclusivity above all else. Second, I want to announce that in honor of my parents' 30th anniversary, the Harold and Patricia Bennett Community Foundation will be established with an initial endowment of $50 million. The gasps from the crowd were audible. Mom actually swayed on her feet and Michael had to steady her. The foundation will provide legal aid services to low-income families and educational scholarships for students pursuing law degrees. I looked directly at my parents, who were staring at me like I'd descended from another planet. Because while you've spent 30 years building something impressive, I've spent 10 years building something meaningful. And tonight I'd like to combine those efforts. Dad's eyes filled with tears. The first time I'd seen him cry since my grandfather's funeral. Sophia, he said, his voice breaking, I'm so sorry. We never knew. We never understood. I know, Dad. But now you do. I stepped down from the stage and walked back to our family table, where our place cards still sat in their elegant calligraphy. I picked up the card that simply said Sophia, and smiled. Tomorrow I'd have Morrison print new ones. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, my family knew exactly who I was. The string quartet resumed playing and gradually the party atmosphere returned. But now the conversations had a different energy. People weren't just networking anymore. They were trying to understand how they'd completely missed the fact that one of the city's most successful business owners had been sitting quietly at family dinners for years while everyone assumed she was a failure. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Portland media wants interviews about the waterfront acquisition. Should I schedule them? I looked around at my parents, who were now surrounded by city leaders wanting to discuss the new foundation, and at Michael, who was answering questions about what it was like to have a billionaire sister he'd never known existed. I typed back, schedule them for next week. And Sarah? Make sure they know the foundation announcement happens here first. This is still my parents' anniversary party. Some things I'd learned were more important than business. Even when business was very, very good.